When we plan, design, and build an infrastructure, do we go far enough to pay attention to what the environment is telling us? Do we pay attention to the most important details? Or do we often ignore the signs along the way? So long, do you build for the future, or do you simply build? It's a question we ask in the light of New Orleans. Building for the future requires, and it's important to understand the history of a region and the unique environmental factors that influence it, because that is the only way that we can successfully design or redesign an infrastructure that works, and to develop a good community emergency response plan. As an environmental scientist, I spent a good deal of time studying the environmental factors that play a role in the Northwest. Today, we're just going to do a little case study of one portion of this region, Portland, Oregon. This is the official end of the Oregon Trail, Oregon City. And right here is where Mount Hood sits. The Cascade Mountains run here. The Coast Range runs here, the Willamette Valley, and the Columbia River. So this is where everyone was going when they were going out west. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of environmental factors that influence or may influence the infrastructure in this region. There's the Cascade volcanoes. There's the unknown boring lava field. We'll discuss that. And Portland sits on major fault lines. Not lines. The Cascadia subduction zone lays over towards the coast, and there's numerous other fault lines. First, we're going to look at the volcanoes of Lewis and Clark. And here they are, these nice triangles. And the most notorious one, Yamari, would be Mount St. Helens. Here's a picture of it after she blew her head off. I lived in the region there in 1980, and for other tantrums that she had. Here's also Crater Lake, which was Mount Mazama. It was recorded by the Indians 4,000 years ago. It's right down here. It actually blew rock from this region over Oregon, over Washington, and into Canada. Wow. Those are some nice bombs. That'll do something to your infrastructure. All right, and of particular importance to me right now is Mount Hood. Here is the Willamette River, and here's the Columbia River, and there's where Portland is. Now, Mount Hood is important because when the pioneers settled there in the mid-1800s, it was smoking. They chose to put a civilization on the flanks of a smoking volcano. So what story is it telling us today? Is it dormant? Well, I don't believe so, and neither do other scientists. This is from the Cascade Volcanoes Observatory. Here's a side profile going from south to north, and all these are earthquakes, cluster quakes. Mount St. Helens had cluster quakes up to 3,000 a day before she erupted. So it's actually in the southeast quadrant. They're putting more and more seismic equipment on that volcano every day. Or not every day, but regularly. They're monitoring it. Now, the thing that's important about this is how we've been building our infrastructure. We've built dams close to these structures. Here is the Columbia River, and Bonneville Dam is the most important one to me right now. We could look at other infrastructure things, but here is Bonneville Dam, and right here is where Mount Hood is, coming down to the river. So we have a major hydrogeoelectric dam built right there, lots of silt up behind it. And my question to you is, if we get, Yamari, 3,000 earthquakes a day, how long will that dam stand? What will be the ramifications? What can we do to make that stand? How much did we plan for that? It was built in the 30s. There are other volcanic considerations. Debris and ash blockage. They can block shipping channels. The ash does terrible things to airline traffic. You can't fly in it. You also have the airlines come right in along the Columbia River. Obvious destruction of bridges, transportation routes, pipelines that Holland likes so much. Ongoing seismic activity. These are all considerations we have to do when we're building an infrastructure. The second thing that I told you about was a boring lava field, and it's something that's very interesting because most people don't know about it. This is called Powell Butte. All of these are named pretty. Mount Tabor, Powell Butte. And as you see this aerial, here is this town built around this. And if it was the only one, Phil, in Portland, it wouldn't be much of an issue. Take a look. Portland, Vancouver, 95 of them. 95 lava vents. 95 mini volcanoes. It is one of 2 places in the world like it. It is the only place that a city has been built on a boring lava field. And what this tells me is that the soil is unstable, and during a major seismic event, it extrudes. What kind of seismic event? What kind of conditions? It's an engineering consideration when you're building an infrastructure. The third thing that I said was an environmental consideration, and there are more than 3, but we're just hitting 3 today, is the earthquake of 1872. Again, the pioneers had an idea of what was going on. It was a sign. In 1872, the inhabitants of Seattle came running out of their buildings, and imagine what the buildings looked like in 1872. And there was not room for them in the streets. They trampled each other. Has anyone been in Seattle recently? There are so many skyscrapers. Where would you stand? Portland's the same way. Where are people going to go? Now, this earthquake occurred in eastern Washington, and I read all these pioneer newspapers. Ribbon cliffs actually fell and dammed the entire Columbia River. It's not the first time that it's happened, and remember, we have dams on the Columbia River. The aftershocks lasted 5 years. 5. And 2 of the volcanoes smoked and erupted. And water emptied out of parts of Puget Sound. So those are some interesting things you don't see in the movies. What would be the current earthquake considerations then? We're just looking at Portland and the Willamette Valley.